I'm Vicky, a 62-year-old former nurse from Chicago. I'd always been proud of the close bond I shared with my son Brian while raising him alone after his father died. Things changed dramatically after he married Stephanie from a wealthy family. Last summer, at a barbecue at their home, surrounded by her prestigious family and friends, Brian did something unthinkable. He pushed me into their pool saying, "Mom, cool off," as everyone erupted in laughter at my expense. If you're watching this and know what it's like when family betrays you, tap that like button and subscribe. Wait until you hear what happened next, when I decided enough was enough. Life wasn't always easy for Brian and me. After his father Michael died of a heart attack when Brian was only 8, I took on extra nursing shifts at Chicago Memorial to make ends meet. Those years were tough, but we formed an unbreakable team. At least, that's what I thought back then. I still remember those endless nights working the emergency room, coming home exhausted at dawn, only to make Brian breakfast and help him get ready for school. The hospital administrators were understanding about my situation and tried to accommodate my schedule, but being a single parent meant sacrifices were inevitable. I postponed my dreams of getting a master's degree and turned down a promotion that would have required travel. "It's just you and me against the world, kiddo," I used to tell Brian when things got tough, and he'd nod solemnly with those big brown eyes that looked so much like his father's. What made it all worthwhile was Brian's sweet nature. He was such a sensitive child, always aware of my struggles and grateful for even the smallest things. When other kids got new video games or trendy clothes, Brian never complained about our modest means. I remember his 10th birthday when I couldn't afford the expensive bike he wanted. Instead of being disappointed, he hugged me tightly and said, "The cake you made is better than any bike, Mom." That was my boy, thoughtful and appreciative. We developed special traditions that bonded us. Sunday nights were sacred, our movie nights complete with homemade popcorn and hot chocolate no matter the season. Every summer, we'd save up for our annual camping trip to Wisconsin, where we'd hike trails and tell stories around the campfire. Christmas always involved our marathon cookie baking sessions with flour fights and tasting the raw dough, despite my nursing knowledge telling us not to. School wasn't always easy for Brian. He struggled with math in middle school, so I'd stay up after long shifts to help him practice equations. When bullies targeted him in 7th grade for not having fancy clothes, I picked up weekend shifts to buy him a few nice outfits, and we worked together on building his confidence. The proudest moment came when Brian joined the high school swim team. He wasn't naturally athletic, but his determination impressed everyone, especially me. I never missed a meet cheering loudly from the bleachers, even after working 12-hour shifts. When he won his first medal, he immediately sought me out in the crowd and held it up, mouthing, "For you, Mom." College applications were another challenge we tackled together. With my nurse's salary, an expensive university seemed out of reach, so we spent countless evenings researching scholarships and financial aid options. I'll never forget the night we got the letter announcing his full academic scholarship to Northwestern University for engineering. We danced around our small kitchen, laughing and crying at the same time. Graduation day was overwhelming. Watching my boy in his cap and gown, I couldn't help but think of Michael and how proud he would have been. Brian found me immediately after the ceremony, hugging me tightly and whispering, "We did it, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you." Even after Brian started his engineering career at a respected firm in Chicago, our relationship remained strong. He'd call regularly for advice on everything from workplace politics to cooking tips. Sunday dinners became our new tradition, and he'd often bring colleagues or friends home, always introducing me proudly as my mom, the nurse who saved lives while raising me. Those were golden years. I never imagined how dramatically things would change when Stephanie entered our lives. Brian met Stephanie at his college friend's wedding 4 years ago. He called me the very next day, unusually excited about this amazing woman he'd met. They'd apparently danced all night, and he'd already arranged to see her again. "You should see her mom," he gushed over the phone. "She's beautiful and smart and has this infectious laugh." 2 weeks later, Brian brought her to our traditional Sunday dinner. I'd prepared my special pot roast and cleaned my modest two-bedroom home until it sparkled. Stephanie was indeed beautiful, tall and slender, with perfect blonde hair and an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "It's so quaint here," were her first words upon entering my living room, her gaze lingering on my well-worn but comfortable furniture. "Brian mentioned you live alone in this cozy place." The way she emphasized cozy made it clear she meant small and outdated. Still, I smiled warmly and thanked her for coming determined to make a good impression for Brian's sake. During dinner, I learned about Stephanie's background. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the Midwest, and her mother came from old money. She'd attended expensive private schools her entire life, followed by an Ivy League education. When I asked about her job, she laughed lightly. "Oh, I've never actually needed to work. I do some charity organizing for Mother's Foundation, but otherwise, I focus on tennis and my social commitments at the country club." The class divide between us was immediately apparent, but I tried to focus on how happy Brian seemed. However, I couldn't help noticing how he kept glancing at Stephanie for approval throughout the evening, something the confident son I raised had never done before. After that first meeting, I saw less and less of Brian. Our Sunday dinners became monthly, then occasional. His phone calls grew shorter, and he often seemed distracted. When I mentioned it, he'd say, "Sorry, Mom, we've just been so busy with Stephanie's family events." The subtle changes in Brian were concerning. He began using phrases I'd never heard from him before, discussing summer homes and networking opportunities, as if they'd always been part of his vocabulary. He traded his practical sedan for a luxury sports car that seemed wildly impractical for Chicago winters. Thanksgiving that year was a turning point. Brian apologetically informed me that we wouldn't be having our traditional dinner at my place. Instead, we'd be joining Stephanie's family at their mansion in Lake Forest. I packed my famous sweet potato casserole and dressed in my finest outfit, a department store dress I'd bought on sale years ago but had barely worn. The Bennett's home was intimidating, a sprawling estate with manicured grounds and a circular driveway filled with luxury vehicles. Inside, everything gleamed with wealth. Crystal chandeliers, original artwork, and furniture that looked too perfect to actually use. Stephanie's mother, Catherine, greeted me with air kisses and immediately handed my casserole to a uniformed maid saying, "How thoughtful. We'll add it to the kitchen options." I never saw it served at dinner. Throughout the meal, I felt increasingly out of place. Stephanie's parents discussed their recent trip to Monaco, while her brother talked about his private equity firm. When Catherine asked about my work, her expression soured when I mentioned the emergency room. "Nursing is so hands-on, isn't it?" she commented, exchanging glances with her husband. What hurt most was watching Brian absorb their mannerisms. The way he held his wine glass, his suddenly refined accent, his knowing laughter at inside jokes about people and places I'd never heard of. When I mentioned our camping trips, Stephanie and her mother exchanged looks, and Brian quickly changed the subject. After 10 months of dating, Brian announced their engagement. He didn't ask my opinion beforehand, something he would have done in the past. Instead, he simply called to inform me it had happened at the Bennett family's vacation home in Aspen. "Stephanie's father has connections that could really help my career, Mom," he explained when I expressed surprise at the speed of their relationship. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." When I gently raised concerns about how quickly their relationship was moving, Brian dismissed them immediately. "You just don't understand how things work in their world, Mom. This is a good move for me." The wedding planning process further highlighted my diminishing role in Brian's life. When I offered to help with arrangements, Stephanie politely but firmly told me everything was under control. Mother has a specific vision, and she's hired the best wedding planner in Chicago. But thanks for offering. I learned about venue changes, date adjustments, and even the final guest count through mutual friends, rather than from my own son. Each time I tried to contribute ideas or family traditions, they were rejected as not quite right for the aesthetic we're going for. The final blow came during a dinner where Stephanie's mother took complete control of the conversation, discussing floral arrangements and menu selections without once asking for my input. When I mentioned the special reading Brian and I had always talked about including in his future wedding, Catherine quickly interjected. "We've already finalized the ceremony program, Vicky. The officiant doesn't want any last-minute changes." Brian sat silently, avoiding my eyes and nodding along with his future mother-in-law's decisions. The wedding was even more lavish than I'd anticipated. The historic Chicago hotel was transformed with thousands of white orchids and crystal decorations that must have cost a fortune. I wore a blue dress I'd splurged on, wanting to look my best for Brian's special day. Despite being the mother of the groom, I felt like an afterthought. During the ceremony, Stephanie's mother was escorted to her seat with great ceremony, while I was simply shown to mine by an usher who didn't even know my name. At the reception, I was seated at a table far from the wedding party, with distant relatives and work acquaintances rather than close family. As I picked at my dinner, I overheard Stephanie's cousins at the next table. "That's the groom's mother in the blue dress," one whispered, not quietly enough. "Can you believe she's a nurse? Stephanie says she tried to wear something completely inappropriate, but they steered her towards something presentable." I had never mentioned my outfit to Stephanie or anyone else. The comment stung, especially since I'd spent hours shopping for something I thought would make Brian proud. Throughout the evening, Brian barely spoke to me, too busy charming Stephanie's family and their influential friends. When we finally had our mother-son dance, it felt rushed and mechanical, nothing like the warm moment I'd always imagined. "You seem different, Brian," I said softly as we moved around the dance floor. "I'm just growing up, Mom," he replied, his eyes already scanning the room over my shoulder. "This is who I am now." After the wedding, Brian and Stephanie moved into a luxury townhouse in an exclusive neighborhood just minutes from her parents' estate. Their housewarming party was attended by Chicago's elite, business leaders, local celebrities, and old money families. I brought a handmade quilt as a gift, something I'd spent months creating. Stephanie accepted it with a tight smile, and I never saw it displayed in their home. Brian's new circle of friends were all from Stephanie's social set, people who summered in exclusive locations and belonged to private clubs with long waiting lists. When I visited their home, conversation would halt awkwardly as I entered rooms, resuming with different topics once I joined the group. I tried desperately to maintain our relationship, sending regular invitations for dinner at my place, or suggesting museums and other outings we'd enjoyed in the past. Brian's responses grew increasingly delayed and non-committal. "We're just so busy right now, Mom. Stephanie's father is introducing me to some key people for my career." Indeed, Brian's career path had shifted dramatically. He left his engineering firm to join a business venture connected to his father-in-law's automotive empire, despite having no background in the industry. "It's an opportunity I can't pass up," he explained when I expressed surprise. "The engineering was just a stepping stone." The real shock came when my birthday passed without a call from Brian for the first time in his adult life. When I mentioned it during our next conversation, he seemed genuinely surprised. "Oh, sorry, Mom. We were at a charity gala that weekend for Stephanie's mother's foundation. It completely slipped my mind." Attempts to discuss the growing distance between us were met with defensiveness. "You're imagining things, Mom," he'd say, or, "This is just what happens when people get married and build their own lives." I started noticing that our get-togethers only happened when they fit Stephanie's schedule. If her parents called with an invitation that conflicted with our plans were immediately canceled. When I once expressed disappointment about a last-minute cancellation, Brian snapped, "You don't understand the obligations we have. These connections are important." With each passing month, I felt increasingly isolated from my son's life. Friends tried to reassure me that this was normal with newlyweds, but I knew better. This wasn't about Brian building a new life. It was about him erasing his old one, and me along with it. The summer barbecue invitation came unexpectedly after weeks of unanswered calls. Brian left a brief voicemail. "Hey, Mom, Stephanie and I are having some people over for a barbecue this Saturday. Her parents and some friends will be there. 2 o'clock. Let me know if you can make it." I was so excited at the prospect of spending time with Brian that I immediately called back to accept. For days, I planned my outfit settling on a flattering sundress in a cheerful yellow that had always been Brian's favorite color on me. I baked my special blueberry pie that had been the highlight of our family gatherings for years and purchased thoughtful gifts. A book for Brian I knew he'd enjoy, and a set of garden herbs for Stephanie. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, warm sunshine, and a gentle breeze. I arrived at their colonial-style home in the exclusive lakeside neighborhood precisely at 2, my arms full with the pie and gifts. The valet who took my old Honda looked slightly disdainful, but I kept my smile bright as I walked up to the imposing front door. The backyard was already filled with about 30 guests, all impeccably dressed in what appeared to be casual wear, but which I recognized as high-end designer clothes. The expansive property featured a stunning pool with an adjacent outdoor kitchen where a private chef was grilling. Stephanie's parents were holding court near the bar, surrounded by attentive listeners. "Vicky, you made it," Stephanie said when she spotted me, her tone suggesting surprise rather than pleasure. She air-kissed my cheek, careful not to actually make contact. "What's this?" she asked, glancing at the pie. "My blueberry pie. It was always Brian's favorite," I explained. "Oh, we have a patisserie handling desserts, but how thoughtful. You can put it in the kitchen." She gestured vaguely toward the house before turning to greet another guest with considerably more enthusiasm. I made my way to the kitchen, where I found a staff member who reluctantly made space for my pie among the professionally prepared desserts. When I asked where Brian was, she pointed back outside. I finally spotted my son near the pool laughing with a group of men in polo shirts, a glass of something amber in his hand. He looked different somehow. His hair styled in a way I'd never seen, his posture more rigid. When he saw me approaching, his smile faltered slightly. "Mom, you're here?" He gave me a brief one-armed hug. "Everyone, this is my mother," he said to the group, not mentioning my name. "Mom, this is William, Charles, and Robert. They work with Stephanie's father." The men nodded politely, but quickly resumed their conversation about a recent golf tournament at their club, effectively excluding me. Brian made no effort to include me in the discussion, and after an awkward minute, he excused himself to check on something with Stephanie, leaving me standing alone. For the next hour, I drifted around the party, attempting to engage in conversations that inevitably died when I joined. I offered to help in the kitchen, but was told by Stephanie that the staff had everything under control. "Just relax and enjoy yourself," she said in a tone that suggested I was being difficult. I overheard Stephanie apologizing to her mother about my presence. "I know, Mother, but Brian felt obligated to invite her. She won't stay long." As the afternoon progressed, I found myself in an uncomfortable conversation with Stephanie's father, Gerald, who had cornered me near the bar. "So Vicky, Brian tells me you were a nurse," he said, emphasizing were, though I'd only retired 2 years ago. "Yes, I worked in emergency medicine for 34 years, I replied proudly. Gerald swirled his expensive scotch. "Interesting career choice. Couldn't get into medical school." His tone was light, but the implication clear. "Actually, I chose nursing specifically. I wanted direct patient care rather than the administrative duties that often consume doctors' time. In emergencies, nurses are frequently the first line of care." Gerald's eyebrows rose slightly. "Well, it's certainly a useful occupation, though hardly prestigious, especially in today's healthcare landscape where real opportunities are in hospital administration and medical technology." Feeling my temper rising, I responded more firmly. "With all due respect, Gerald, nursing is much more than a useful occupation. We save lives daily, provide essential care, and are the backbone of medical treatment. I'm extremely proud of my career." I noticed heads turning in our direction, including Brian's. He quickly excused himself from his conversation and hurried over looking concerned. Everything okay here? He asked, his eyes darting between his father-in-law and me. Before I could respond, Gerald chuckled condescendingly. Your mother was just defending the nursing profession rather passionately. Quite the advocate. Brian's face tightened. Mom, maybe keep the conversations light today. This is supposed to be a fun gathering. I felt a sting of betrayal, but nodded, not wanting to create a scene. As Gerald walked away with a satisfied smirk, I turned to Brian. I was just standing up for my profession, Brian. There's nothing wrong with that. Look, Mom, he said in a low voice. Gerald has connections that are really important for my career right now. Can you please just try to blend in? Talk about something neutral, like the weather, or compliment the food. As Brian walked away, I felt increasingly isolated. To distract myself, I began sharing a story about Brian's childhood with a couple who had seemed marginally friendlier than the others. I told them about 12-year-old Brian winning a science fair with a project we'd worked on together for weeks. He was always so creative and determined, I said with pride. We stayed up until 2 a.m. finishing that volcano model, and I noticed Stephanie approaching with a tight smile, making a subtle cutting motion with her hand that Brian apparently recognized from across the yard. He immediately excused himself from his conversation and joined us. Mom, he interrupted sharply. Nobody wants to hear old stories right now. Hurt and frustrated, I finally spoke up. Brian, I've barely seen you all afternoon. You invited me here, but you've hardly spoken to me. Everyone's been treating me like I'm invisible or an inconvenience. You're being dramatic, he said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. I'm not being dramatic, I insisted, my voice rising slightly with emotion. This isn't like you, Brian. The son I raised would never treat people this way. His face flushed dark red. The son you raised, maybe it's time you realized I've outgrown that person. You need to accept that this is my life now. Stephanie appeared at his side, placing a manicured hand on his arm. Everything okay? Mom's making a scene, Brian said dismissively. I'm not making a scene, I protested, feeling tears threatening. I'm trying to have an honest conversation with my son. Honest conversation? Brian laughed harshly. Or are you just jealous that I finally have a successful life, that I've moved beyond that tiny apartment and your limited world? The cruelty in his words felt like a physical blow. Guests had stopped their conversations, turning to watch our confrontation. Stephanie's parents moved closer, expressions of disdain clear on their faces. Brian, please, I said, my voice breaking. This isn't you talking. Something in his face hardened. He grabbed my arm firmly, startling me. Mom, cool off, he said loudly, and with a sudden push, I was falling backward. The shock of cold water enveloped me as I plunged into the pool, fully clothed. For a moment, underwater, there was silence. Then I surfaced, gasping to the sound of uproarious laughter from the gathered guests. Blinking chlorinated water from my eyes, I saw Brian standing at the pool's edge, laughing along with everyone else. Stephanie was beside him, not laughing, but wearing a satisfied smirk. Her parents were openly chuckling, Gerald raising his glass in a mock toast to his son-in-law. The yellow sundress clung to me, suddenly heavy and transparent, as I struggled to the pool steps, humiliation burning through me more intensely than any fever I'd ever nursed. No one moved to help me. No one offered a hand. As I emerged dripping from the pool, Stephanie approached with a thin pool towel. Here, she said with false sweetness. You look like you needed to cool down. More laughter followed. With as much dignity as I could muster, I wrapped the inadequate towel around my shoulders and found a chair at the furthest edge of the yard. I sat alone, soaking wet and utterly humiliated as the party continued around me as if nothing had happened. For the next hour, I sat alone on that isolated chair, water dripping from my hair and clothes, watching guests steal glances and whisper. The sun was warm, but I felt chilled to my core. Not from the water, but from the ice-cold reality of what my relationship with my son had become. As I sat there, memories flooded back with more force than the pool water had. I remembered the night Brian had a fever of 103 when he was 6. I'd stayed awake, applying cool compresses to his forehead, singing softly until his temperature finally broke at dawn. I remembered working double shifts for months to save enough for his senior year class trip to Washington, D.C., then helping him pack while hiding my exhaustion. I recalled the countless school lunches packed, the soccer practices I'd rushed to after work, still in my scrubs the night I'd helped him practice his graduation speech until 3 in the morning. All those years of putting his needs first, of teaching him to be kind and respectful, especially to those less fortunate or powerful than himself. What had happened to that boy, the kind child who'd once given his allowance to a homeless man outside the grocery store? The teenager who'd defended a classmate from bullies? The young man who'd thanked me in his college graduation speech? My thoughts were interrupted when I overheard Stephanie's mother loudly suggesting I should leave before dinner. "She's putting quite a damper on the atmosphere, don't you think?" Catherine said to another guest, not bothering to lower her voice. "I mean, look at her just sitting there all wet and miserable. So awkward." I glanced at Brian, standing nearby, waiting for him to defend me. But he simply looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes and saying nothing. That was when I knew. It was time to leave. Not just the party, but this one-sided relationship where I was expected to accept scraps of attention and outright disrespect. I gathered my soggy purse and began walking toward the gate that led to the front driveway, planning to call a rideshare service. As I passed the pool house, I overheard Stephanie's voice from inside. Curious, I paused. "Mother, the pool thing worked perfectly," Stephanie was saying with a laugh. "I told Brian she'd make a scene if we kept ignoring her." "Well done, darling," Catherine replied. "With any luck, that's the last we'll see of her. So embarrassing having a nurse for a mother-in-law." "Did you hear her trying to defend her little career to your father?" "Brian's finally seeing the light. He actually told me last week how embarrassed he is by her middle-class values and that tiny house she won't sell. He even shared that story about how she used to make him take the bus because she couldn't afford a second car." We were dying laughing. Their casual cruelty froze me in place. But what hurt infinitely more was learning that Brian, my Brian, had shared our private struggles for their amusement. The financial hardships we'd faced together, which I'd thought were sacred bonds between us, had become fodder for mockery. In that moment, standing dripping wet outside a pool house that was larger than my entire home, something shifted inside me. The hurt transformed into clarity. Brian needed a serious wake-up call, not just for my sake, but for his own. This wasn't just about me being disrespected. It was about watching my son lose himself to people who valued status over character. Instead of continuing to the gate, I turned and walked to the guest bathroom inside the main house. I needed to dry off and collect my thoughts. Inside, I found a hairdryer and began the process of making myself presentable again. As I opened a drawer, looking for a comb, I discovered something that confirmed my worst fears. A stack of family photos where my face had been physically cut out. Photos from Brian's graduation our last Christmas together, even a recent one from before he met Stephanie, all modified to erase me. This wasn't just social climbing. This was systematic erasure of Brian's past, and me along with it. I texted my best friend Janet, "You won't believe what just happened. Need moral support for what I'm about to do." Her reply was immediate. "Whatever it is, I've got your back. You deserve better than this." With renewed resolve, I dried my hair, straightened my still damp dress, and applied the emergency makeup I kept in my purse. I looked at my reflection. A 62-year-old woman who'd raised a child alone, saved countless lives in my nursing career, and overcome numerous hardships with dignity intact. I refused to leave this place defeated. I returned to the party, now moved to the patio area where tables had been arranged for dinner. For 15 minutes, I observed silently from the periphery. Brian was performing for his father-in-law's colleagues, laughing too loudly at their jokes, refilling their drinks with nervous attentiveness. Beneath his polished exterior, I could see tension in his shoulders, anxiety in his eyes as he tried to navigate Stephanie's world. I watched Stephanie controlling his movements with subtle gestures, a finger tap indicating he should refresh drinks, a slight head tilt, signaling him to join a different conversation group. Gerald frequently interrupted Brian mid-sentence, speaking over him, or correcting his perspectives on business matters. Despite his apparent acceptance into their world, Brian looked fundamentally unhappy. The realization strengthened my resolve. The pool incident had happened exactly 1 hour ago. Plenty of time for reflection and precisely the right moment for action. Conversations quieted as I walked confidently to the center of the patio area. The sun had begun its descent, casting a golden glow over the gathering. I waited silently until I had everyone's attention. "Excuse me," I said clearly. "I'd like to say something if I may." Stephanie started toward me with an alarmed expression. "Vicky, we're about to serve dinner. This isn't really the time for—" I raised my hand slightly, continuing in a calm, firm voice that silenced her interruption. "This will only take a moment. I think it's important." The gathered guests turned to me with expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. Brian looked mortified, while Stephanie's parents exchanged irritated glances. "First, I want to thank Stephanie and Brian for inviting me today," I began politely. "It's given me a unique opportunity to see my son's new life up close." I made eye contact with different guests as I spoke, my voice steady and clear, the same tone I'd used to command attention in chaotic emergency rooms. "Some of you may not know much about Brian beyond what you've seen recently. Before he became part of this world, he was a kind-hearted boy who grew into a compassionate, hardworking man. When he was 15, he spent every Saturday for a year volunteering at a retirement home because an elderly patient I'd cared for had no visitors. At 17, he turned down a party to help our neighbor rebuild her fence after a storm." I watched Brian's face, seeing a flicker of recognition in his eyes as I continued. "The Brian I raised valued people for their character, not their bank accounts. He understood that true worth comes from how you treat others, especially those who can do nothing for you in return." Glancing at the now uncomfortable guests, I addressed the pool incident directly. "An hour ago, my son pushed me into that pool to humiliate me, and many of you laughed. I understand why. I don't fit into this world. My clothes aren't expensive enough, my job wasn't prestigious enough, and my house isn't large enough." Stephanie stepped forward again. "Vicky, this is inappropriate." "I'm not finished," I said, my voice never rising, but carrying an authority that stopped her cold. "What's truly inappropriate is learning that my son has been sharing stories of our financial struggles for your entertainment. The hardships we faced together, which I thought were sacred bonds between us, apparently became jokes at dinner parties." Brian's face paled. "Mom, I heard Stephanie and her mother discussing it," I said simply. "They mentioned specific stories only you could have told them, Brian." Murmurs spread through the guests. I reached into my still damp purse and pulled out several photographs. "I brought these today because I'm proud of the man I raised." I held up a photo of Brian at his college graduation. This is Brian graduating with honors in engineering, a field he was passionate about before connections became more important than purpose. Next came a photo of him receiving an award. This is Brian being recognized for developing a more efficient water filtration system for developing countries. He used to care about making a difference. As I displayed each photo, I could see the conflict in Brian's eyes growing. Some guests were looking at him with new interest, perhaps seeing dimensions to him they hadn't known existed. "I've been saving for years," I continued. "Working extra shifts, putting aside what I could. I wanted to give Brian a special gift." I pulled out a slightly water-damaged envelope from my purse. This contains a check for $60,000, my entire retirement savings beyond my pension. It was meant to help you and Stephanie buy a home that would truly be yours, Brian, not one controlled by your in-laws' money and expectations. Audible gasps came from several guests. Stephanie's face showed shock, while her father's reddened with anger. "Now wait just a minute," Gerald interrupted, stepping forward. "You come into my daughter's home and create this spectacle." "Your daughter's home?" I asked quietly. "Or is it your home, Gerald, since you hold the mortgage and use that fact to control what colors they paint the walls and which guests they're allowed to invite?" Brian looked stunned. I realized he hadn't known I was aware of these arrangements. "How dare you?" Catherine hissed. I remained calm. "I dare because I love my son enough to tell him the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Something true family does." I turned directly to Brian. "I'm not giving you this money today. Instead, I'm putting it in trust with specific conditions. It will be there when you're ready to build a life based on your own values, not someone else's expectations." The silence was absolute. Stephanie was fuming, her parents outraged. But among the other guests, I saw thoughtful expressions and even a few subtle nods of approval. "I've always loved you unconditionally, Brian, but unconditional love doesn't mean accepting disrespect. It means caring enough to hold up a mirror when someone loses their way." I tucked the envelope back into my purse and straightened my shoulders. "Thank you for your attention. I hope you all enjoy your dinner." With that, I turned and walked steadily toward the gate, head held high. Behind me, I could hear the buzz of conversation erupting, but I didn't look back. For the first time since arriving, I felt completely dry. The drive home was tearful but cathartic. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my phone was buzzing with messages. Several came from guests at the party, people I'd never met before today, expressing admiration for my speech and sharing their own stories of family tensions across class divides. "You said what many of us have thought watching Brian these past years," wrote one woman who identified herself as an old college friend of his. "He used to be so genuine." Later that evening, Brian called. His voice was tight with anger. "How could you humiliate me like that in front of everyone? Do you have any idea what you've done to my reputation with Stephanie's family?" I remained calm. "Brian, I spoke the truth. If the truth humiliates you, perhaps that's worth reflecting on." "You don't understand how things work in this world," he snapped. "I understand perfectly," I replied. "The question is whether you still recognize the difference between the values you were raised with and the ones you're adopting." He hung up without responding. A week of silence followed. I focused on nurturing myself and rebuilding connections I'd neglected while trying to maintain my relationship with Brian. I called old colleagues from the hospital for lunch, reconnected with neighbors, and joined a book club I'd been putting off. Janet, my best friend of 30 years, was my rock during this time. "You did the right thing, Vicky," she assured me over coffee. "Sometimes love means standing up rather than standing by." I decided to take the Grand Canyon trip I'd dreamed of for years, something I'd postponed repeatedly, hoping Brian would join me. The majesty of that vast landscape put my personal troubles in perspective. Standing at the rim as the sun rose, I felt a profound sense of peace about my decision at the barbecue. 3 weeks after my return, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. When I opened it, Brian stood there, looking more like his old self in jeans and a simple t-shirt rather than the designer clothes he'd adopted. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking. "Can we talk?" "Over tea at my kitchen table? The same one where we'd shared countless meals during his childhood?" Brian finally opened up. "I'm sorry," he began, eyes filled with tears. "What I did to you at that party was unforgivable." "Yet here I am, ready to listen," I said gently. He wiped his eyes. "After you left, everything fell apart. Half the guests made excuses and left early. Stephanie's father berated me for not controlling you better. But two of his business associates actually pulled me aside later and said they were impressed by you and disturbed by how you'd been treated. Brian explained that the incident had forced him to see his new life through outside eyes. I've been feeling trapped for months, Mom. Stephanie and her parents have expectations for every aspect of my life. My job, our social circle, even how I dress and speak. I changed careers because Gerald insisted the engineering wasn't prestigious enough. I gave up friends because Stephanie found them boring. Why didn't you talk to me? I asked. I was embarrassed, he admitted. I'd gotten so caught up in the status and connections that I convinced myself it was worth it, and then I felt like I'd gone too far to turn back. We spent hours talking that day. Brian revealed he'd started seeing a therapist to address his people-pleasing tendencies and issues with self-worth. The therapist helped me see that I've been seeking validation from people who only value what I can do for them while pushing away the one person who loved me for who I am. Over the following months, our relationship began healing. Brian set clear boundaries with Stephanie and her family, insisting on making his own career decisions and standing firm when they attempted to isolate him from me and his old friends. To my surprise, their marriage actually improved once he stopped trying to be someone he wasn't. Stephanie respected me more when I started standing up for myself, he explained during one of our now regular Sunday dinners. She married me, not the yes man I turned into. 6 months after the pool incident, Brian invited me to dinner with him and Stephanie. To my surprise, she was cordial, even apologetic in her own way. Brian's been different since that day, she admitted when we had a moment alone. Stronger, more confident. I've come to realize that the qualities I was trying to erase were the ones that made me fall for him in the first place. The real test came a year later when Brian and Stephanie decided to buy a house. To everyone's shock, they refused Gerald and Catherine's offer to purchase a property for them in their exclusive neighborhood. We found a place we love in a diverse neighborhood with good schools, Brian told me with pride. It needs some work, but it's ours. That's when I gave them the trust fund money I'd promised. $60,000 toward their down payment with no strings attached except mutual respect. The transformation in our family dynamic has been remarkable. Brian reconnected with his engineering roots, starting a consulting firm focused on environmental sustainability. Stephanie discovered a passion for teaching art at an inner-city school, something her parents initially dismissed but now reluctantly respect. My relationship with my son is different now, healthier, with clear boundaries and mutual respect. I've built my own fulfilling life with friends, travel, and volunteer work at a medical clinic for the uninsured. I no longer measure my worth through Brian's attention or approval. At 63, I've learned that self-respect isn't selfish. It's necessary. By standing up for myself that day at the pool, I not only reclaimed my dignity, but also gave my son the opportunity to rediscover his. As for Stephanie's parents, we maintain a cordial distance. They'll never fully approve of me, and I'll never fully trust them, but we've reached a détente for Brian and Stephanie's sake. Looking back, getting pushed into that pool was one of the best things that could have happened. It created the splash needed to wake us both up to what was being lost. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who were treating you poorly? How did you handle it? Was there a moment when you realized that loving someone means setting boundaries rather than accepting mistreatment? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about family relationships that bend, but don't break with proper care. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is hold up a mirror, even when the reflection is hard to face. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to speak your truth when it matters most.